In this video, we're going to tackle t-shirt making with the xTool M1 Ultra, and I'm going to walk you through single color heat transfer vinyl designs as well as multi-layer vinyl so you can achieve more than one color, and a third option which makes multicolor t-shirts even easier. I've got some tips and tricks as well as upgrades and accessories in this video, so be sure to watch through the whole thing so you don't miss those. Keep in mind that even if you don't have an xTool M1 Ultra and you have a different machine such as a Cricut, the parts of this video where I'm pressing the heat transfer vinyl into the shirts is still applicable to you, and it will give you some idea of what's involved in this process. And if you guys watch this channel regularly, you'll know that I do a lot of 3D printing as well as laser cutting, and the change of pace of making t-shirts was actually very enjoyable. There was something very rewarding about making something practical that I could wear, and that's something I'm going to do well into the future with the M1 Ultra. You'll see a lot of custom t-shirts that I make, and I'll be wearing those on screen during my videos. And finally, before we get started, if you're heavy into making custom apparel and you really want to supercharge your process, xTool recently launched their Apparel Printer, which is a machine specifically for custom apparel, whereas the M1 Ultra is more of a multifunction machine. I'll talk about that Apparel Printer more at the end of this video, but you can also find links to it in the video description down below. And at the end of this video, I'll also do an overall review of my thoughts and opinions on the M1 Ultra, so don't miss that. Let's get started. The xTool M1 Ultra comes in a large and surprisingly heavy box. Now, this is the Deluxe kit, so there are a few extra bits and pieces inside of this box that could be contributing to its weight. And so the box does suggest that you get some help lifting it from a second person, but it is all packed very well and very well protected inside. The M1 Ultra itself will be in its own box, and below that you'll find another layer of styrofoam, and below that, this is where you'll find the other pieces in the Deluxe kit, such as the riser base, the honeycomb bed, as well as the RA2 rotary module. We'll get to that in a moment, but inside of the M1 Ultra box, the first thing you'll find is the user manual, as well as a sample material pack, which is always nice to have. And the machine itself will be hiding under that next layer of styrofoam, and I will be able to lift this out on my own. However, if you're feeling a little uncomfortable, definitely get somebody else to help you with this too. You definitely don't want to drop your brand new machine. And with the box aside, we can now start removing all of the protective layers of plastic and lift the orange lid to reveal more styrofoam and more goodies and accessories inside. So under the lid, this is where they've hid the power supply, the triangular prism holder, and that will come in handy for making cuts with the laser if you don't have the honeycomb bed. You'll find that in this green box, and below that there's another green box with the smoke exhaust module, and this goes on the back of the machine. I'll show you guys that in a bit as well. On the left hand side, we've got the 20-watt laser module. The machine can also be purchased with a 10-watt module, but I would recommend the 20-watt if you do plan on doing a lot of laser work. And right next to the laser module, we got the multi-function carriage. We'll touch on that a little bit later as well. And then close to the gantry, we've got a fine point pen, so xTool includes one of those for you, as well as a tiny toolbox, and it's got more bits and pieces in there, including those fine cut blades that we'll be using in this video to process the vinyl. So once we remove all the styrofoam, you'll find a bunch of these white thumb screws, and you're going to remove all of those, and that's going to unlock the gantry. On the bottom of the base plate, you'll find the cutting mats, and we can go ahead and remove those and remove the last piece of styrofoam once you move the gantry forward so you can wiggle it out. Now we've totally unpacked the F1 Ultra, and because again this is the Deluxe kit, I'm going to show you guys what else is included. So we've got the honeycomb laser bed, and below that are all of the accessories and bits and pieces for the RA2 rotary module. The rotary module will be key if you're looking to do things like tumblers and water bottles. I'm gonna have a future video on that specifically for the M1 Ultra. I've done that video for all of the other xTool machines so far, so go ahead and check my channel if you're looking for lots of great tutorials on how to process tumblers and water bottles with xTool machines. So we'll put that aside for now, as we're not going to be using it in this video, and we won't be using this riser base either. However, I will put the M1 Ultra on top, and we'll take a quick look at that. So in my opinion, the riser base is an absolute must-have accessory for the M1 Ultra, as the height of the objects and workpieces that you can put inside without it are pretty limited. The riser base has these little shelves where you can put the honeycomb bed at each of those different levels to accommodate different heights and thicknesses of workpieces, and xTool has conveniently put a sticker on the side to show you exactly which height to put the honeycomb bed or tray for each of the various thicknesses of materials or diameters if you're using the RA2 rotary module. The riser base also has a nice little hidden storage compartment inside of the front door where you can put some small hand tools. Now it's time to get the rest of the M1 Ultra set up, and looking at the back of the machine, there are two ports on the left hand side. One is for an air assist module and the other is for the fire safety set. And then in this area in black, we've got all of the electrical connections, which we'll get to in a moment. But first I'll show you how the smoke exhaust module connects to the back of the machine. It has these orange spring-loaded tabs that will click into the back of the M1 Ultra. And it's also got a single electrical connector on the smoke exhaust module itself. But you'll notice there's two receptacles on the back of the machine. And that means this smoke adapter can be fit to exit either to the left or to the right. And that's a really nice option to have depending on your workspace setup. I would highly recommend, if you are using the laser module, get yourself the AP2 from xTool. It's the best fume filtration system I've tested to date, and I've got one of these adapters here that you can buy on my website, which you can use to very easily connect this white hose from xTool to the inlet of the AP2. But for this video, we're only going to be using the cutting blades, so we're not going to need anything for smoke and fume extraction. Let's get to those electrical connections now. So of course we need to power our machine, and for that we've got the power supply, which will connect to this port here. On the far right side, this is where we've got a USB-C port, and the machine comes with a USB-C cable, and this is going to connect to our computer or laptop. Next to the power supply, you'll find a USB-A connection, and you'll find a USB key inside of the accessory kit, and this is like a lockout key. If it's not plugged in, the machine won't operate, so you will want to take that key out and plug it into the back of the USB-A port. And don't lose it. Beside that, we've got a bunch of expansion ports, and these are actually also USB connections, but they do have a different shaped connector, which does seem to be proprietary to xTool. And so I've got this Bluetooth dongle here from the AP2 fume extractor, which we just talked about, and I'm going to plug it into one of these expansion ports, and later when we go to process a job, you'll see in xTool Creative Space that it does establish a wireless connection to the AP2 fume extractor. Now let's move it back up to the front of the machine, and inside underneath the lid, we'll find the basic carriage. And the basic carriage can hold things like the fine point blade as well as some pens. And we're going to remove the stickers that were holding that magnetic cover to the front, because obviously xTool didn't want that falling off during shipping. In our accessory kit, there was also the multifunction carriage, which shipped with the same kind of stickers attached to it, and we'll remove those. I'm going to be attaching that to the gantry for now. We're not going to be using it, but I do just want to demonstrate how these different accessory modules attach to the toolhead. On the back of each of these modules, you'll find a bunch of electrical blade connectors, and those will engage with the receptacles on the toolhead here. So each of these modules will attach in a downward motion, and there's a slotted guide to help you line things up, and you'll just push that down and then pull the lever over to the right hand side to lock it in place. And if we were to put other cutting blades in there, you can see them underneath of that magnetic cover. So if you're new to the xTool M1 Ultra, hopefully this gives you a pretty good idea of what you're working with if you just purchased it or you're considering purchasing one. And now we're finally ready to fire this thing up by pressing the power button at the back of the machine, and the interior lights of the M1 Ultra will turn on, and the machine will home itself in the back left corner. Now let's get started with working with heat transfer vinyl, and we need to get familiar with how the xTool M1 Ultra works with xTool Creative Space software. And the first thing I want you to notice is that as I manually move around the tool head and that laser crosshairs moves around, the position of the tool head is tracked within xTool Creative Space, and it's represented by another red crosshairs. So you can see right now the red cross moving around, and that's just me manually moving around the tool head with my hand. Next, we need to load a blade into the basic carriage, and we've got two choices here in terms of standard cutting blades. One of them is the fine point blade, and the other one seems to be referred to as just a cutting blade in the xTool literature. and it's pretty easy to tell the difference between the two, even if you don't take the plastic protective cover off. But if you do, the fine point blade has a much smaller blade and the cutting blade is much larger. But on the other end of the tool, the fine point blade also has a small metal spring-loaded shaft sticking out of that end. The fine point blade is more suitable for thin materials like the heat transfer vinyl, so we're going to load that into the basic carriage. And to do that, all we need to do is remove the magnetic cover, and then there's a latching mechanism down at the bottom where we can insert the fine point blade and then just snap latch it shut. With the blade tool inside, it'll latch shut securely so that it won't pop back open, and then we can just put the magnetic cover back on top. Now on the xTool website, there is a frequently asked questions section where you can find more information about the various cutting tools, as well as other tools just like pens and foil transfer tips and their intended application, and also which of the carriages they're intended to be inserted into. In the video description down below, I'll put a link to this frequently asked questions section on the xTool website, as well as links to any other resources that I mentioned in this video. Now, in addition to blade selection, the other thing we need to do is select which of the grip mats we're going to be using. And for heat transfer vinyl, it'll be the light grip mat, which is colored blue. And for that, you're going to just need to remove the plastic protective covers off of the grip mat, and then you can just place it on top of the bottom plate of the M1 Ultra with the tab facing the right hand side. Now we're going to grab some heat transfer vinyl, and I've got this stuff from xTool. When placing the heat transfer vinyl on the grip mat, it's always going to go shiny side down. Make sure it's sitting nice and flat. You don't want any bubbles captured under there. And then back in xTool Creative Space, we're going to change our laser processing mode. I'll select blade cut, and you'll see the drop down menu on the right hand side. We do not have the electrostatic mat, so we'll just select none for that. And over on the far right side, where we'll select our material, inside of the easy set material library, they already have presets for heat transfer vinyl. So we'll select that material. Now we can mark out our processing area. So you'll click the little button that has the flag on it, and our material is rectangular in shape. So I'll just select rectangle. Then on the M1 Ultra, I'll manually move the tool head over to the top left corner of our material, line up the crosshairs, press the little plus button on the front of the machine, then move the tool head down to the bottom right corner. Again, press the plus button on the front of the machine, and that's going to define the area of our material. So now we know where to place our designs such that they are located within the material that we have to work with. Now I've used the image button on the left hand side, and I've just found 2 vector files on my computer that we're going to be cutting out for our first t-shirt. Now the important thing to remember here when working with this vinyl is that we are going to need to mirror our images horizontally, so I've gone ahead and reflected those. You may also notice that because I've already set the material to heat transfer vinyl within xTool Creative Space, all of the cutting settings have already been preset. So it's going to be cutting with 100 grams of pressure at 80 millimeters per second, and I'm not going to modify any of those. I'm just going to go ahead and start this job and put my trust into the xTool reference settings. After sending the files to the M1 Ultra, all I need to do is press the silver button on the front of the machine, and the job will start. The whole process will only take a few minutes for this design, but full disclosure, this portion of the video is sped up. The tool head doesn't normally move that fast, but I think a few minutes processing time is pretty reasonable, and then you can go ahead and remove your vinyl. Now, you'll notice here that I removed the entire grip mat to do that, which technically isn't necessary. I could have left the grip mat inside of the M1 Ultra, but either way, once the sticky surface is exposed, you'll want to put the plastic protective cover back on to prevent dust and hair sticking to it, and you'll want to clean that cover off. You can use cans of compressed air or one of these electric air dusters. I'll link to those in the video description down below. I really like having one of those around as it saves me from buying cans of compressed air. Now, when removing the vinyl from the grip mat, you'll want to exercise some caution because in some cases, the blade will go right through both layers. So the first layer being the vinyl, and then the second layer being the clear backing. And that's what happened here. So you can see that I'm going to try and peel it from the other side, and it didn't go all the way throughout the entire design, so I was able to successfully peel it off in this direction. But essentially, you just don't want to carelessly rip the entire thing up and then tear through some of your design. And now that I've got the entire sheet free, I'm going to use a hobby knife, and I'm going to just trim away some of the excess sheet. And in the areas like this here, where the M1 Ultra blade went through too deep, I'm going to also just trim away the clear backing. Ideally, I'd like to have a nice perfect rectangle to work with. I didn't get that in this case, but it's still gonna work out just fine. And I'll use my hobby knife right now to weed away the excess vinyl that I don't want pressed onto the shirt, while leaving behind the clear backing. Now, there are special tools to do this. I'm using a hobby knife just to show you guys that it can be done. In one of the next examples, I'll use a proper weeding tool to do this. And depending on the complexity of the design, it is sometimes easy to get confused with what needs to be peeled away and what needs to be left behind. So it's always nice to have a reference image of your design nearby so you don't make that mistake. The two designs that I have here are pretty straightforward, so luckily it was very simple, and that's what they look like. In order to press the vinyl on our shirts, we're going to need a heat press, and for this I'll be using the xTool Smart Heat Press. Now, this is the full-size press, but xTool also has a mini press, and they have a variant of this that includes a press stand. So this one is just completely handheld, and it comes with this base here such that you can rest the press on a table without the hot side burning the surface of your table. It also comes with a few other accessories, such as the power cord, which just plugs into the back, as well as a Bluetooth dongle, and this is to connect the wireless controller, which is also included in this kit, and it has a USB cable to charge it because it is wireless. Getting this thing working is pretty simple. There's a switch at the top of the controller, which we can turn on, and now we have to pair it with the heat press. So we'll go over to the Bluetooth dongle, and there's a small button on there that you'll press and hold for a few seconds, and once you release it, the blue light will start flashing, and that will put it in pairing mode. And on the controller, it's the same process with the button on the right hand side. Just press and hold, and then the two devices will establish a connection. Now you can control the temperature using the temperature knob on the left hand side, and so you can dial it down or up, as well as the set time using the second knob. When we go to press the vinyl on the shirts, we're going to need a press mat, and xTool sent me their Smart Press mat, which matches the size of their Smart Press. And we're going to place our garment, in this case a t-shirt, on top of the mat. The mat has a sticker or label on the bottom that says this side down, so it should be very clear which side is up. And I'm going to begin with the small logo that's going to go on the front of the shirt over the left side of my chest. So I'm going to take a t-shirt that I already have with a logo placed in a similar area. I'm just going to lay it over top of that shirt, and it's going to give me some idea of the proper placement of that logo. That's just a little trick that I use instead of trying to manually take measurements. Now, it's recommended to put something between the vinyl and the heat press, and for this you can simply just use regular parchment paper. Optionally, you can also go for some Teflon sheets that are specifically made for this kind of process. I'll put a link to those in the video description down below, but for this first example, we'll just use the simple parchment paper to show you that it does work. On the controller, I'm going to set the temperature to 165 degrees Celsius, and I'm going to set the time to 35 seconds. To get the heat press to start heating up, there's a power button on the back left-hand side, and you'll have to press that button once, and then you'll notice the temperature start to climb on the controller, and the light on top of the heat press will be amber while it's heating, and then when it reaches its set temperature, it'll turn green. Now on the controller, when you want the timer to start, you're going to press that round button, and that'll start the countdown from the set time. So now I'm going to line everything up. I'll place the heat press on top, I'll press the button to start the timer, and then I'll apply a medium amount of pressure. And I've sped this video up, but I did wait the full 35 seconds. Now I'm going to remove my parchment paper, and I'm going to attempt to peel off the clear backing of the heat transfer vinyl. Now, some heat transfer vinyl is cold peel and some is hot peel. For the life of me, I couldn't find this information on the xTool heat transfer vinyl anywhere. With a simple Google search, I did find some information saying that if it does have a clear backing, it should be hot peel vinyl, so you would peel it while it's still hot. Now, from my personal experience, I think that you should still wait a few seconds or even up to a minute or so and not peel that clear backing off while it's extremely hot. Because the first time I tried to lift that, I did notice some of the vinyl coming off with the backing. So what I did was I pressed it a second time for about half of the 35 seconds. Then I let it cool for about a minute or a minute and a half, and it's still very warm to the touch. It's definitely not room temperature. And then I was able to peel off that clear backing. I've also seen that some people like to do a second press from the back side to really make sure that the vinyl is set into the t-shirt. So I'll put the parchment paper down between the shirt and the press pad, and then I'll hit it with the heat press for another 35 seconds. And because there's 2 layers of t-shirt between the logo and the heat press, I had contemplated doing it for half the time, but I think that the full 35 seconds was fine, and I definitely didn't damage the logo. So it worked out and it stuck on there very well. Now I'm going to move on to the large logo on the back of the shirt. But because there is a logo already on the front and I don't want to add more heat to that, I'm going to take the press pad and I'm going to place it inside of the t-shirt. I'm also going to put a layer of parchment paper on my table so the vinyl doesn't pick up any dirt or anything from my table. And now you'll see I'll place the large logo on the back of the shirt. I find this setup works well for doing logos on the front and the back so that the front of the shirt doesn't get any more heat than it needs to. I've centered my logo on the shirt and I've placed it a few inches down from the back of the collar. Again, I've placed the parchment paper on top and I'm going to be using the exact same method here, same temperature, 165 degrees Celsius, 35 seconds, and I'll press it down with a medium amount of pressure. This time around, I waited a little longer before starting to peel off the clear backing. It was definitely still hot, but I think that little bit of extra time allowed the vinyl to stick to the cotton better before I started to peel up that clear backing, and I didn't start to peel off any of the vinyl this time, so I didn't have to hit it with a second pass with the heat press. And this is the result on the front and the back. And I just want to point out here that if you watch different videos, you'll get different opinions on how many times you need to press it and for how long and how much pressure to apply. And I think this is all great advice as a reference to get you started, but ultimately you're going to have to develop your own method depending on the materials that you're working with. So expect a little bit of trial and error and you'll get a feel for what's right for you. We'll continue with more examples in a moment, but after using this equipment for a little while, I noticed a few things that needed to be addressed. And the first was some level of organization of all of the tools and accessories that come with the M1 Ultra. So I put together this organizer that takes care of all of the loose odds and ends that come with this machine. There's a specific place for each part, and in some cases, like the markers and the cutting tools, there's a few extra slots if you acquire some extra pieces. There's also a spot at the back for an extra ink module, and then of course there are 3 large openings for each of the different tool heads. This obviously makes it a lot easier to find what you're looking for, plus there's a lesser chance of losing one of these small pieces. Additionally, you'll reduce the chance of damaging one of those expensive components like the tool heads if you got them just loosely rolling around in some kind of a bin. You can find a link to this in the video description down below, or head on over directly to my website, embracemaking.com. The next issue that I set out to solve was, although it is nice to have a wireless controller, more often than not, I did want the controls right on the heat press itself. There were actually a total of 0 times where I needed to change the temperature of the heat press from across the room, and when I wanted to start the timer, again, I wanted to start that timer with the heat press in my hands. And so I devised a mounting solution that can be attached to the heat press. All you need to do is remove this small magnetic cover. If you just push down on one of the corners, you can lift it up and it will come away from the heat press body, and then you'll install my bracket. And you'll notice that it has 2 holes in the top. The bracket sits in that pocket and it can be positioned in either direction depending on which way you like to hold the heat press. And it comes with 2 mounting screws. There's just 2 M4x10 socket head cap screws that you can screw in through the top. It'll be very obvious where these 2 screws go, and just keep in mind while you're doing this that you are just clamping down on plastic, so you don't need to over tighten them. Now you've got yourself a convenient controller holder mount where at least you still have the option of using it remotely or within finger's length reach of those handles while you're holding the heat press. I also found it a good way to keep these 2 parts together while they're in storage and not in use. But the biggest improvement was the operation of the timer start button that you can just access now very quickly and easily with your thumb while you're holding the handles. Now you can actually start your timer the moment the heat press touches your material. And finally, after working with the heat press, I also noticed that I had sheets of parchment paper as well as the Teflon heat press sheets laying on my work surface, covering other items and sometimes just falling on the floor. I wanted to neatly organize those, and I was already working on a tube-shaped container, and it occurred to me that if I split that container into 3 parts, I could neatly hold those rolled up sheets so they take up less space and they don't get damaged or creased. And if I'm not using those pieces for that purpose, I can always reassemble them back into the tube-style container. and use it to store some hand tools, specifically the ones with sharp points and edges, such as my hobby knives or things like these weeding tools. This way I know exactly where I'm storing my sharp tools so that I'm not reaching my hand in a drawer and randomly getting cut or poked. And obviously you can put other hand tools in there as well if you so wish. Now if you're interested in any of these, remember you can find them on my website, embracemaking.com. Now we're going to move on to a 2-layer design, and this is what we're shooting for. So we're going to be using black and white vinyl, and I'm going to start off with a red shirt. Now this is a children's shirt, so I am going to start by measuring the space that I have to work with on the shirt, just because it's going to be obviously smaller than an adult shirt. And we'll start with the white heat transfer vinyl, so I'll place that on the grip mat, shiny side down, and in xTool Creative Space I have my design. Now I want all of this design that you see here to be colored black, and what I'm going to do then is I'm going to create a background for this black design because I don't want the red shirt showing through. I want the white vinyl to show through. So I'm going to select my design, and then I'm going to select offset. I'm going to take that offset and create a 4mm offset on the outer pattern only. So now you'll see a vector shape outline of the entire design, and it is its own object on the object list on the left hand side, and I can toggle that to be visible or invisible. I'm going to reposition this design within the workspace. I'll just rotate it 90 degrees and pull it up to the top left corner. And at this point I got some bright idea here to create some reference markings for when I need to layer my vinyl. Now you'll see later on this isn't going to work, but I'm going to go ahead and show you what I attempted to do, because in some cases you might be able to get this to work. So what I've done is I've used basic vector shapes, just 2 rectangles, to create these L shapes that will frame the entire design. The concept was that if I cut these on both the black and white layers, then I can use them as references when I need to line up my 2 layers of vinyl by hand. Again, this isn't going to work out for me, but I'm showing you my failure here as well. So what I've done is I've disabled the graphic that is the center, which will be black, and I've only enabled the layer that is going to be the white background. And I'm going to go ahead and cut that out. Again, I'm using the xTool reference settings for the heat transfer vinyl. And this time around, unlike the neon green and yellow vinyl, there was no instances where the blade cut fully through, so I was able to peel this layer off successfully, and you'll see this time around that I left the grip mat inside of the M1 Ultra. This time around, I'm also going to be using a proper weeding tool. I'll put a link to this in the video description down below. If you guys remember, in the previous example, I used a hobby blade to do that, but this is a much better and more effective tool to weeding off the areas that we do not want pressed onto the shirt. You'll also see here that I've left those L-shaped reference markings on there because at this point I still haven't realized that my plan isn't going to work out for those. But here's what this piece looks like, and now we'll move on to working on the layer of black vinyl. So I'm going to get that down on the grip mat, and then we're going to go back into xTool Creative Space, and I'm going to bring back the original design. I'm going to disable the outline. You can see that I've also left the reference corners in place, and if this was a design where I could get those reference corners to work, then it would be very important that I make sure that the graphics do not move. I'm going to make some slight adjustments to the cutting pressure, so you can see that I'm reducing it from 100 grams down to 95 grams, just to be sure that the cutting blade doesn't go through that clear backing layer. And then I brought in another one of my logos, and this is for a different t-shirt design, but I'm just trying to make good use of the fact that I've already got a layer of black on there. So I'm going to do something similar here where I'm just creating an outline, and I'll be cutting out that outline. Again, it's for a different t-shirt design, so just kind of ignore that for now. It's not relevant to this example. I've sent this job over to the M1 Ultra, and it's time for it to get started cutting. Again, these clips here are sped up a little bit, but the cutting process generally takes a few minutes at most, so it's not that slow. When it's complete, I'm going to very carefully peel this layer of black vinyl off of the grip mat, leaving the grip mat in place. That'll bring that entire layer of vinyl over to my cutting mat, where I'll use a hobby knife to trim away any excess. After that, I'm on to the next step, where I'm using my weeding tool to remove any of the vinyl that I do not want on the shirt. And this design is a little bit more complicated, with quite a few more letters and numbers for me to remove. So I find this is the most time-consuming part of the process, and when you're designing a graphic to be placed on a shirt, this is something you should consider if you plan on selling your design. Your time is valuable and you should be pricing your products accordingly. Now that I've got my 2 layers ready to go, I'm going to set the heat press to 145 degrees Celsius, and I'm going to pre-press the shirt for 2 reasons. One, I want to preheat it a little bit, remove any moisture, and get it as smooth as possible, kind of like ironing the shirt. Now at this point, I realize my reference markings aren't going to work, so I remove them at the last second, and the first layer of vinyl to go down is the white layer, and this is the background layer. I'll center that up on my shirt, and while I'm doing that, the reason that those reference markings aren't going to work is because they fall within the area of the heat press. And so if I had left them on, they would actually get pressed onto the shirt as well. And I don't know how I would have gotten them off. In order for them to work, I would have needed a smaller press that wouldn't fall over those areas, or I would have to put them out far enough that, again, it would fall outside of the area of the press. Now, in doing these multi-layer or multicolor vinyl designs, one method that I've read about was trying to just very quickly sort of kiss the first layer with the heat press, just for a few seconds at 165 degrees Celsius. And for some people, that's long enough just to get that first layer to stick to the shirt, and then you can peel that clear layer off. But I did not have this experience. I ended up having to press it for more or less the full 35 seconds before I could get that clear carrier sheet to come off without removing any of the vinyl below it. Now, the concern with doing this, and the whole reason for trying to use a short press instead of for the full time amount or even close to it, is that the vinyl tends to shrink with more heat and more applications of heat. So if you keep pressing the same layer over and over for too long, then there's a possibility that the layer underneath might shrink more than the layer on top. But luckily, I didn't seem to have that experience with this design here. And as I'm doing the voiceover in this video, and this shirt has now been through the wash once or twice, I haven't had the design come apart or find that the 2 layers have separated. So you can see I just put the black layer directly on top of the white layer while it was still warm, and then put the parchment layer on top of that and just pressed it once again. At the time, I was concerned with the vinyl shrinkage, so as I was pressing the second layer, I wasn't pressing it for the full 35 seconds because the shirt was already hot. So at this point, I was only applying the heat for about 15 to 20 seconds at 165 degrees Celsius, but I did have to do it twice. Then I waited about a minute for the whole thing to cool down slightly. Again, at this point, it's still pretty warm, and I was able to peel that clear carrier layer off. And I think the design turned out looking pretty sharp, but I think the takeaway here is that this is a general approach to the process, and you will have to experiment a little bit. Now, if you recall in the previous example, while I was cutting out the black vinyl, I did cut out an extra outline for another one of my logo shirts. And again, I'm going to be placing this logo on the front left breast of the shirt. So I'm kind of doing the same thing that I did with the first example, where I'm comparing the location to the first shirt that I did. And this one is also going to be a double layer design. And in this case, the black is going to be the background layer. So I'm going to press that on with the parchment paper. And the reason that I'm showing this example is because I wanted to check to see if it was just an anomaly that in the first example that I couldn't get the carrier sheet off with just a quick press, but it seemed like it was also the case with this black vinyl. And you can see that I started to prematurely pull up the carrier sheet, and I slightly damaged one of the corners of that black hexagon. So I ended up having to do the same thing as the red shirt, where the first layer was pressed on for a full 35 seconds. I also felt that I had to apply a little more pressure, and you may have seen me leaning on the heat press with my forearms. And this is where I think the Smart Press kit from xTool with the stand and the toggle clamp would be a much better solution than just the Smart Press kit, where you're pressing everything on manually by hand. When you're pressing by hand, there's just too much opportunity for variations in pressure. I also see that I added the second layer, went ahead and pressed that on from the front, and then wanted to experiment a little more here and add even more heat by doing a press from the back side. I kind of wanted to test how much heat I could get away with before ruining the shirt, and even doing a full press from the back, it didn't seem to have any negative impact on those 2 layers. So I don't know about other brands of heat transfer vinyl, but it seems like this xTool stuff isn't extremely sensitive to overheating. So now you've seen the process where we're layering vinyl to achieve multicolor designs. But what if you want even more complex designs on your shirts? Well, that's where we're going to be employing the ink module on the M1 Ultra, and it came in this separate box. So inside of the box, you'll find a ink cartridge as well as the inkjet head itself. And in that box, you'll also find some little clips, which I believe are to limit the travel of the inkjet head when using the honeycomb laser bed. So if you have something on there like wood that you're trying to print on, but for this example, we're not going to need those. And the final thing you're going to find in the box is this little pad where you can store the protective cover for the inkjet head. And it has a little place where you put these little white sticky notes where the inkjet module appears to clean itself before you start printing. You'll see that in a moment, but first we need to swap out the multi-carriage for the inkjet module. And before we do that, we need to install the inkjet cartridge into the module. So you can remove the front cover. It's just magnetic like all of the other covers on the other tool heads. And on the bottom of the inkjet module, there is a cover down there as well. There's two buttons on the side that you can press and release that cover. And then once you remove the larger front cover, this flap pops up. And this is now where we can insert the ink cartridge. In the ink cartridge box, this is where you'll find those little white post-it note type stickers that I just mentioned a moment ago, and of course the ink cartridge itself. It has its own protective stickers on there, which I assume are to keep the ink from drying, and those will need to be removed before we insert that into the module. Once the protective seal is removed, I'm almost certain you're not supposed to touch that small printing apparatus at the bottom, so avoid smearing that with your fingers while you awkwardly try and get this thing into the print head. I'll be honest, it's a little awkward, and it took me a few tries to get it in at the right angle, and you'll see that I did almost touch the bottom of the ink cartridge. After getting it to click in place, then I closed that door and I put the cover back on the bottom for now while I get this module inserted into the tool head carriage and the rest of the job set up. The inkjet module mounts the carriage the same way as all of the other modules, so it slides in from the top. You'll pull the lever over to lock it in place, but the one difference is that it does have this extra cable that plugs into the side of the carriage. You'll see the port on the side, and it's very obvious where it goes, and once you have that plugged in, then you can put the silver cover back on the front. Then down at the front right hand corner of your workspace, you'll find a small tab where you can slide in or slot in this cleaning pad. It will gently click into place, and now we can grab one of our white post-it note style stickers. They do have a label on the first one that says this side up, and we're going to adhere that to the area labeled cleaning sticker. Now we need something to print on, and I'm going to be using this printable heat transfer vinyl. I'll put a link to this product in the video description down below. It's pretty cool what you can do with this stuff. And you can see that one side is white and the other side has some printing already on that. So we're going to put the printing side down on our grip mat. The plain white side is facing up, and this is the side that we're going to be printing on. At this point now, I can remove that cover from the bottom of the inkjet module. And it may not have been obvious, but in the basic carriage, I still had the fine point blade in there. We're going to be using both in this example. So in xTool Creative Space, for the processing mode, I'm going to select multi-module processing, and I'm going to import my image, which is just a color PNG image. Similar to the other examples, I'm going to mark my processing area. So in this case, these vinyl sheets come in 8.5 by 11, which is pretty much the size of a standard piece of paper. And that's because you could, I think, feed them through a standard inkjet printer as well. But the cool thing here is we're going to be able to do everything in one shot on the M1 Ultra. So you'll notice that my PNG image does have a layer of transparency. So I've created an offset vector shape. And that vector shape is going to be what the fine point blade cuts out. So I'll change those cutting parameters to 85 grams of pressure and 80 millimeters per second speed. For the color image, I'm going to select the ink module. And for that, I'm going to set the intensity to 60, and I'm going to be doing 2 passes. You'll also notice here that I do get a warning where the inkjet module does not seem to be able to process the full work area the same as some of the other modules. So I'm going to have to slightly reposition my graphic to stay out of those gray areas. And before processing the job, I get this calibration warning, which I'm going to ignore. but later you'll see that I shouldn't have ignored it and I shouldn't have assumed that this setup would have been pre-calibrated from the factory. The idea behind the calibration is that you properly set up the offset between the inkjet module, for example, and the cutting blade, so that when you're doing a multi-mode process like this and you go to cut out the design afterwards, the cut is properly located with respect to the printed graphic. Now, my vector outline that was used for cutting was offset 2 millimeters from this graphic, and as you watch me peel this up, you can see that the offset was off pretty significantly. And while it didn't cut into my design, it ended up sort of looking like a white drop shadow, so I decided to just run with it. But I'm pointing this out because it does illustrate the importance of properly calibrating your machine before running a job like this. Don't assume that things are properly calibrated from the factory. At this point, the process is going to be similar to the other heat transfer vinyl examples, but I'm going to be also using the Teflon sheet. This printable vinyl seems thinner than the other single color vinyl, so I felt that it might be a little more sensitive to heat, and that's why I wanted that extra layer and not just use solely the parchment paper. So I'm going to pre-press the shirt at 145 degrees Celsius just to preheat it, and then I'll peel away the backing of the printable heat transfer vinyl and I'll place it on the shirt. It's not tacky or sticky, so it can be pretty easily repositioned. And then I'll set my temperature to 175 degrees Celsius. And I've got that timer set to 35 seconds. Then I'll go through layering the parchment paper with the Teflon sheet, and then I'm ready to get this design pressed down. Now, while I'm doing that, one final thing I want to point out here is that you should have noticed that I didn't mirror this design in xTool Creative Space like I did with these single color vinyls. And that's because with this printable vinyl, it's printed and pressed front side up. The other thing I want to point out is that the white area that didn't get printed on pretty much turned transparent after pressing. And this makes sense to me now because I purchased the printable vinyl that was meant for light colored shirts. I knew I was going to be pressing this on a yellow shirt, so I chose the light colored variant, but I actually think light is specifically for white colored shirts. If you're pressing on anything other than white, I would likely recommend trying the dark colored variant. I haven't personally tried it, but I get the sense that the dark colored variant, the vinyl is not as transparent, and the color of the shirt behind it won't bleed through quite as much. And this brand also seems to have some glow-in-the-dark options that I'm definitely going to try in the future, so again, I'll put links to this stuff in the video description down below. Now, when it comes to the performance of the xTool M1 Ultra, I haven't thoroughly tested all of the modules just yet. I plan on doing a little more testing of the laser module specifically. I've got a video coming out very soon using the laser module as well as the RA2 rotary module to process water bottles and tumblers, so don't miss that. But the more that I look at this machine and consider how the price of this M1 Ultra Deluxe bundle is roughly the same as the price of the xTool S1 20 watt Deluxe bundle, which is only a laser machine, the more that I see the unbelievable value in the M1 Ultra. And if I was choosing between those two machines, the only reason that I would go with the xTool S1 is if I needed the laser to process larger work pieces, in which case the S1 has a larger working area, or if I specifically needed the IR laser for very specific materials, because that IR laser is only compatible with the xTool S1. Otherwise, I really wouldn't want to miss out on the multifunctionality of the M1 Ultra. And if I was in the market for specifically a vinyl cutting machine and I was comparing the M1 Ultra to the Cricut is obviously less expensive, but I would hands down take the M1 Ultra any day over the Cricut if it was within my budget. And again, it's much more expensive, but if you can spring for the M1 Ultra, again, you get so much more functionality. I used to own a Cricut machine. It was an older model, the Cricut 2. I think they're up to 4 now. But the concept is still the same, where you're placing the vinyl on top of the grip mat, and then you're feeding it into a conveyor-like system. And that works okay, but when you're doing things like, let's say, stickers, where you're potentially printing on an inkjet printer, and then you're trying to feed that in through the Cricut and align your cutting outline around those designs that you've already printed somewhere else, there's a good chance that you're gonna have some sort of misalignment. Whereas on the M1 Ultra, you can do the printing and cutting all in one setup, so there's way less chance of any sort of misalignment. In this video, I also covered the use of the xTool Smart Heat Press, and xTool sent me that, and it worked reasonably well. But if you do have the chance to get their 3-in-1 kit, I would definitely recommend going for that one instead of just the basic smart heat press. And the reason for that is that you'll notice on their website, the 3-in-1 kit comes with a platform for the smart heat press, and that includes a toggle-like mechanism where the heat press can be clamped down onto the shirts, and that frees up your hands to do other things, so you're not manually pressing down. And the other big advantage in that is that the pressure applied with this toggle mechanism is going to be consistent with every single press. So definitely check out the 3-in-1 press over the basic kit. The other thing I want to briefly touch on is the xTool software. So if you're not already an owner of an xTool machine, their creative space software is very good. And I'm actually quite impressed with how quickly they've been able to build out that software to connect and work with all of their different machines. Their machine lineup is increasing at a rapid pace, and the software is usually one of those things where a lot of companies sort of fall behind or let slip. And in this case, xTool has done a very good job of keeping the workflow across those different machines very intuitive, and I haven't really noticed any sort of buggy behavior while I'm using xTool Creative Space, so it's been very solid for me. And one final thing I'd like to mention is that I've watched a lot of other videos on the M1 Ultra from other people, and one thing everyone likes to bring up is that phrase, jack of all trades, master of none, because again of the multifunctionality of the M1 Ultra. And while I wouldn't consider the M1 Ultra a master of any one of those functions, I haven't found it to be subpar at anything that I've asked it to do so far. Now, in saying that, if you are running a business that specializes in a particular function, let's say apparel making, custom t-shirts, hats, and that sort of thing, you definitely will want to look into a machine that is specifically going to address those needs. The M1 Ultra is a great place to get your feet wet and get started, but at the very beginning of this video, I had mentioned that xTool just launched their custom apparel printer, which is specifically made for apparel making. When using the Apparel Printer, it appears that the designs still have to be heat pressed onto the garments, but it looks like the actual printing process has been highly automated and it's a lot faster than the M1 Ultra, and that workflow is going to be a lot more efficient, and this is obviously of going to be great interest to you if you're running a business. Also, from what I can tell from the content that I've seen online, the designs coming off of the Apparel Printer are going to be a lot higher quality and more vibrant colors than what's going to come off of the xTool M1 Ultra. So again, that's something that I would highly recommend you look into if you're specializing in custom apparel. I'll put links to that in the video description down below. Anyways, that's it for now. Thank you guys so much for watching right to the end of this video. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss the next video. The next xTool video is likely going to be the M1 Ultra plus the RA2 rotary module. You're not going to want to miss that. And I'm always going to have more new exciting maker news, as well as great tools and accessories to enhance your experience. Thanks for watching. See you guys next time.